Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Hot Topic in Fresh News. Today is the 3rd of December, 2023, and we have some pressing news to share. Early in the morning on April 25, 2010, in St. Paul, Minnesota, Heidi Firkus was fatally shot during a 911 call reporting an intruder. Her husband, Nick Firkus, claimed the gun discharged during a struggle with the intruder, but inconsistencies in his account raised suspicions amongst the police. The claim of a home invasion seemed out of place given the generally quiet residential neighborhood of Minnehaha Avenue where the Firkus resided. Authorities found no evidence of the intruder Nick described. Meanwhile, a neighbor, Brandon O'Connor, reported hearing a muffled argument from the Firkus home around the time of the shooting. Sadly, Heidi was pronounced dead at the scene, while Nick was treated for a minor gunshot wound to his leg. His subsequent interviews with the police revealed more puzzling details, such as their normal evening routine before the incident and the fact he had a shotgun loaded with 2 shells. As we continue to keep a close eye on this ongoing investigation, we hope to get more clarity on the perplexing circumstances surrounding Heidi Firkus' tragic death. Stay tuned for our deep dive analysis of this case with David later in the program. Hey there, listeners! This is your host, Emily.
And this is your commentator, David, at your service.
We're your daily source of news and analysis on Channel Hot Topic and Fresh News. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Now, let's get straight to the hot topics.
Early morning home invasions, they seem quite unusual. Can you clarify why this particular case raises eyebrows?
Well, typically, home invasions occur when the residents are likely to be out. But this incident took place at 6:30 on a Sunday morning when most families are home. That's not a time burglars usually choose.
Interesting. And the police, have they been able to track down the alleged intruder?
No, they haven't. In fact, a neighbor, who was awake at that time, didn't see anyone leave the Firkus home.
Could the neighbor's account be flawed in any way?
It's possible, but he was alert due to some noise and he was watching from his window. His account adds to the doubts surrounding Nick's story.
So, what's your take on this entire situation?
I believe there's more to this case than meets the eye. The discrepancies in Nick's account and the unusual circumstances of a home invasion in the early hours of a Sunday suggest there may be some hidden truths.
Well, that's a strong claim. What if Nick is telling the truth?
It's entirely possible. However, the pieces of information available right now don't quite fit his narrative.
I must apologize. You're right, the details thus far do raise questions. We'll need to wait and see how this investigation unfolds. Could you tell us more about Brandon O'Connor's account of what he heard?
O'Connor, the neighbor, claims to have heard muffled arguments followed by what sounded like gunshots. He also heard a voice crying out, "You shot her, you shot me. Please, please, no," and then it was quiet.
And what happened when the first responders arrived?
When first responders arrived, there was nothing they could do for Heidi. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Nick was taken to a hospital to be treated for a grazed gunshot wound to his leg.
What about Nick's interview with the police? Can you shed some light on that?
In his police interview, Nick claimed that they watched a movie the previous night and went to bed around 11 p.m. He woke up around 6 a.m., heard someone fiddling with their doorknob, retrieved his shotgun, and loaded it.
This whole situation seems mysterious. What's your opinion?
It's definitely a complex case, with several conflicting accounts. The police will need to carefully piece together all the evidence and testimonies to figure out what happened.
I have to agree. It's a tragic case, and I hope the truth comes to light soon.
Just a quick side note, folks, you are tuned into Hot Topic and Fresh News, and if you're enjoying the content, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps us continue to create high-quality content for free. And don't forget to share it with your friends too. Remember, we live every day.
Fantastic. Spot on, your likes really make a difference. Now, let's get back to the news. What did Nick say when he woke Heidi up?
Nick said he told Heidi that someone was trying to break in and instructed her to call 911. They planned to escape from the house.
What happened next according to Nick?
Nick claims that as they were moving downstairs, the front door burst open. He says there was a struggle with an intruder over the gun, and in the process, the weapon fired, hitting Heidi, who was in the kitchen.
That's tragic. How did he describe the scene?
Well, Nick told Sergeant Gray that during the struggle, the gun went off, chest high, striking Heidi. He was certain he hit her in the back while she was running away.
This case is truly heartbreaking. What can you tell us about Heidi?
Heidi was very well liked. She was described by her friends at Calvary Church as a person who genuinely loved people, was the life of the party, and was very loyal. She and Nick met at that church and got married in 2005 when she was 20 and he was 22.
Indeed. A very tragic story. Let's hope justice prevails. How was Nick perceived in the community?
According to Marcus Sarrazin, Nick had a warm and engaging personality, always smiling, and carried himself with confidence. He was known in the church for his high character and integrity.
Why would Nick and Heidi leave the safety of their bedroom?
Nick explained they had a plan that if they ever found themselves in danger, they would avoid a face-off and try to escape to their car in the garage.
What did Sergeant Gray discover about Nick and Heidi's personal life?
Nick disclosed that they had normal marital issues like stress over finances, quality time, and vacations. He also revealed they were behind on their bills and were planning to move out because they had foreclosed on their house.
So, they were facing financial issues?
Yes, they were. In fact, they were 24 hours away from eviction.
This seems increasingly complex. Was there any strange behavior from Nick during the interview?
Sergeant Gray was struck by how Nick asked about Heidi's condition, referring to it as the final answer on Heidi. This raised more suspicions around his account of the incident.
How did Nick react when he learned about Heidi's death?
Sergeant Gray said she didn't make it, and Nick's response was that he figured as much. Sergeant Nicole Sipes found this reaction highly unusual, particularly the delay of an hour and 40 minutes into their conversation before asking about Heidi's state.
What was Nick's demeanor during the police interview?
According to Sergeant Sipes, Nick's demeanor was like it was just another day. This was unsettling considering the traumatic event that had just happened.
Did Gray directly ask Nick about his involvement in Heidi's death?
Yes, he did. Gray asked Nick if he had anything to do with the incident, to which Nick responded with a firm no, absolutely not.
What did the investigators find at the Firkus home?
Investigators found that the house didn't look like it was ready for a move the next day. There was still food in the fridge, clothes in the closet, and no signs of forced entry. Sergeant Gray concluded that based on the physical evidence, Nick's version of the incident couldn't be plausible.
What did the entryway of the Firkus home reveal about the alleged struggle?
There were items like a vase, receipts, and a beer bottle that were untouched. This raised suspicions because if there was a struggle, one would expect these items to be knocked over.
What about signs of a break-in at the front door?
Sergeant Gray noted markings, but they didn't appear new, casting doubts on Nick's claim that the door had been forced open the day of the murder.
Did the police test Nick's claim about hearing the front door shaking from upstairs?
Yes, they did a reenactment to see if they could hear the front door jiggling from the bedroom, which they couldn't.
Did the investigators find signs of the imminent eviction and move Nick mentioned?
Gray found it doubtful. There were a few empty boxes, but not enough to suggest they were ready to pack up and move out the next day.
How did the community react to these findings?
Heidis Mentors from Calvary Church, Marcus and Katina Sarrazin, found the details about her death and the eviction puzzling. It just didn't add up for them.
What did Heidis Mentors, the Sarrazins, think about the moving story?
They found it odd. They knew Heidi to be someone who planned things out and would have notified people about such a big change.
What was the atmosphere like at Heidi's funeral?
According to Marcus Sarrazin, there was a lot of emotion. However, they were struck by Nick's lack of grief.
Did Marcus Sarrazin suspect Nick could have been involved in Heidi's death?
Yes, he even asked some of the couple's friends about the possibility, but they dismissed it, saying Nick loved Heidi too much to harm her.
What happened after Nick hired attorney Joe Friedberg?
Friedberg advised Nick to cease communications with the police, suspecting that he was being viewed as a suspect. When investigators wanted Nick to assist in sketching a portrait of the intruder, Friedberg advised against it, and instead, they hired a private sketch artist.
How did the police react to Nick's sketch of the intruder?
They found it odd that Nick used a private artist and then stopped cooperating with their investigation. The sketch, when released to the public, did not generate any leads.
What happened with Nick after Heidi's death?
He moved out of their home a few weeks after Heidi's passing. 2 months later, he began a friendship with Rachel Sanchez, the sister of one of Heidi's best friends, which turned into a romantic relationship in spring of 2011.
What was Rachel's impression of Nick?
She felt a deep connection with him because of their shared trauma. She found his steadiness attractive, and the fact that he shared her strong faith was a significant factor as well.
Did they get married?
Yes, they did. Within a year of dating, Nick proposed, and they married a few months later. They started a family quickly and had 3 children.
Did Nick talk about Heidi's murder with his friends?
According to his friends, Andrew and Emily Erickson, he didn't talk much about it, but when he did, his story was consistent.
But wasn't there a significant development in the case 5 years after Heidi's death?
Indeed, a tip came in that finally linked a name to the sketch of the intruder Nick had provided.
Considering this new information, don't you think it's possible that Nick was telling the truth all along?
It's certainly a possibility, but we need to remember that the investigators were skeptical of Nick's story from the start.
True, but as journalists, we have to keep an open mind. The new tip could potentially change the course of the case.
You do raise a valid point, and I agree it's crucial to keep an open mind. But, in my experience, the truth often lies somewhere in between. I will definitely think about this more.
That's all we can ask. To keep investigating, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep listening.
Absolutely, and that's our commitment here at Hot Topic in Fresh News.
What happened with the case after someone called in a tip linking a name to the sketch of the suspect?
Initially, it seemed significant, but it turned out the person they named was incarcerated at the time of Heidi's death.
Did Nick show any interest in finding the person responsible for Heidi's murder?
His second wife, Rachel, said he rarely talked about the case being solved and made no efforts to find the perpetrator.
Did Nick ever check on the status of the investigation?
The police found it odd that throughout the investigation, Nick never contacted them to ask about its status.
What sparked the new developments in the case in 2019?
Sergeant Nicole Sipes took over Heidi's case and gave it a fresh perspective. She reviewed the entire case file, including a financial timeline in collaboration with the FBI.
What did this financial timeline reveal?
It showed that while Nick and Heidi were on top of their bills before buying their house, the home purchase in 2007 strained their finances. They had a combined annual income of about $50,000, with Nick working at his family's carpet installation business and Heidi as a clerk at a financial services company.
How was the couple's financial situation at the time of Heidi's death?
They were in deep financial trouble. They hadn't paid the mortgage for 22 months and had lost their home to foreclosure.
Was Heidi aware of their financial situation?
Sergeant Sipes found no evidence in the couple's texts and emails that Nick had informed Heidi of their financial troubles.
Did Heidi attend the eviction hearing?
No, she didn't attend the hearing. It's believed she didn't even know about it.
Did their family and friends know about their financial struggles?
According to Sergeant Sipes, neither Heidi's family nor their friends knew about their impending eviction.
Why do you suppose Nick kept this from Heidi?
Sergeant Sipes believes it was out of shame. It appears Nick didn't want his friends, family, and particularly Heidi, to know the extent of his financial failure.
What did Sergeant Sipes discover about a conversation Heidi had with a friend just before she died?
The specifics of their conversation weren't mentioned here, but it appears to be another piece in the puzzle of Nick's deception.
How did Nick explain the financial troubles to Heidi?
According to Sergeant Sipes, Nick told Heidi they were the victims of identity theft, claiming a loss of $20,000 to $30,000. But this was not the case.
Did Nick's second wife, Rachel, experience financial issues with him as well?
Yes, Rachel revealed there were financial problems in their marriage too, and Nick lied about many things.
After investigating the case for 19 months, what conclusion did Sergeant Sipes reach?
Sergeant Sipes concluded that there was no third person involved in Heidi's murder. The only two people in the house at the time were Nick and Heidi.
What was Rachel's initial reaction when Sergeant Sipes approached her about Heidi's case?
At first, she was reluctant to get involved, but she knew it was the right thing to do, and she agreed to participate for the sake of truth.
What did Rachel reveal about their financial situation during her marriage to Nick?
She discovered a letter stating they hadn't paid their property taxes and were facing eviction in 2020. She believed Nick was repeating the same pattern of dishonesty he had with Heidi.
Did Rachel confront Nick about her growing distrust?
Yes, she initiated a conversation and secretly recorded it. In the recording, Rachel expressed her distress due to Nick's easy ability to lie.
What was Nick's response when Rachel suggested he could lie about something as serious as Heidi's death?
He didn't deny it outright. Instead, there was a silence that Rachel later described as killing her. She wanted him to deny her suspicions, but he didn't.
What action was taken after Rachel shared these recordings with Sergeant Sipes?
11 years after Heidi's death, Nick Firkus was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. A grand jury later indicted him on first- and second-degree murder charges. On May 19, 2021, 11 years after Heidi's death, Nick Firkus was arrested at his home by a St. Paul police SWAT team and charged with second-degree murder. Later on, a grand jury indicted him on first- and second-degree murder charges.
How did Heidi's friends react to this arrest, Emily?
Heidi's friends, Marcus and Katina Sarazin, were relieved. They found it hard to articulate their feelings, but they expressed gratitude.
And what about his own friends? What was their reaction?
His friends Emily and Andrew Erickson were in disbelief. They found it challenging to accept that Nick, a man with no history of violence, would kill Heidi, the woman he loved. After almost 2 years free on bail, Nick Firkus went on trial on January 27, 2023. However, his second wife Rachel wasn't allowed to testify, and the taped conversation between her and Nick was ruled as having no bearing on the case.
What was the prosecution's line of argument to establish motive, Emily?
Prosecutors presented an unusual motive. They suggested Nick staged a burglary because his secrets were on the brink of being exposed. They believe he opted to portray himself as a victim rather than be exposed as a liar and a failure.
And how did Nick's lawyers respond to that?
They argued that such a motive didn't make sense. They asserted there was nothing about murdering Heidi, the woman they claimed he loved, that would improve his situation.
Did Nick's lawyers argue that Heidi was aware of the couple's financial problems?
Yes, they disputed the state's claim that Heidi was oblivious to their finances. According to them, Nick insisted that Heidi was involved in all major decisions.
So, if the prosecution's case didn't hinge on motive, what was their main contention?
Their case focused on whether there was an intruder in the house or not. Nick's lawyers maintained there had been an intruder, just as Nick described in his 911 call and his interview at the hospital.
Did the defense present any evidence to substantiate their claim of an intruder?
They pointed out that the absence of the intruder's fingerprints or DNA at the scene was because, as Nick told the investigators, the intruder was wearing gloves.
On the other hand, what did the prosecution present to counter this claim?
The prosecution emphasized the absence of evidence of a struggle, using a scale model created by the FBI to illustrate how small the entryway was where the supposed struggle took place. As I see it, the prosecution has undoubtedly done a remarkable job in presenting their case. The lack of a struggle is indeed puzzling. If the intruder and Nick had a life and death struggle in such a confined space as the model suggests, it would be reasonable to expect some signs of disturbance.
I agree with your assessment, but I also think it's important to remember the unpredictable nature of such situations. Panic, fear, adrenaline, all these factors can create scenarios that may not align perfectly with our expectations or assumptions. It's quite possible for a violent encounter to leave surprisingly little physical evidence.
I acknowledge your point, and it does add another layer of complexity to this case. But I still find it difficult to reconcile the alleged struggle with the lack of physical evidence.
That's perfectly okay. It's normal for us to have differing views and interpretations of the same set of facts. The most important thing is to keep an open mind and be willing to reassess our conclusions in light of new evidence or perspectives.
You're right, David. I'll certainly ponder over it more. Your point definitely provided a fresh perspective.
What did the FBI's animation reveal about the fatal shot that killed Heidi?
According to the animation created by the FBI, it showed that the bullet that killed Heidi was most likely shot from shoulder level, which matches Nick's height.
Were there any indications of an intruder according to Nick's lawyers?
Yes, they pointed to tool marks on the door, which they claimed were consistent with someone wedging a screwdriver between the frame and the door.
Did any witnesses hear more than one voice at the scene?
Nick's next-door neighbor, Brandon O'Connor, testified that he heard a voice saying, "You shot her, you shot me." Please, no, suggesting the presence of a third person. However, prosecutors argued that O'Connor may have misheard Nick while he was on the phone with the 911 dispatcher.
Did Nick testify during the trial?
No, Nick Firkus did not take the stand. The case went to the jury after an 11-day trial.
What were the closing arguments from both sides?
The state argued they had strong circumstantial evidence that contradicted Nick's claims. In contrast, Nick's defense team emphasized there was no direct evidence linking Nick to Heidi's murder. Prosecutor Craker even suggested that Nick shot Heidi while she was on the phone with the 911 operator.
What evidence did the prosecution present to argue that Nick shot himself?
They claimed that the 65 seconds between the end of Heidi's call and the start of Nick's 911 call was enough time for Nick to check Heidi's pulse, confirm she was deceased, shoot himself, and then make the 911 call. This theory is supported by marks left by shotgun pellets at the bottom of the front door, which they believe were made when Nick shot himself.
How did the defense challenge this theory?
Nick's attorneys argued that phone records show Nick misdialed 2 numbers before getting through to 911. They believe that this, combined with the 38-second gap, makes it impossible for Nick to have shot himself.
What was the defense's stance on the absence of an intruder?
They maintained that the lack of evidence for an intruder does not necessarily mean there wasn't one. They pointed to tool marks on the door and the testimony of Nick's neighbor as supporting evidence of an intruder's presence.
How did Nick's friends react to the prosecution's case?
Emily and Andrew Erickson, friends of Nick, were convinced that the prosecution failed to prove Nick was the shooter. They were open to inconsistencies but said they didn't find any in the prosecution's case. After a trial that lasted for several days, the jury delivered their verdict within 5 hours on February 10, 2023. Surprisingly, for some, Nick Firkus was found guilty on 2 counts of murder, premeditated and intentional.
That's quite unexpected. Emily, can you share more about the reactions in the courtroom?
Yes, certainly, David. The Saracens, Heidi's parents, were present in the courtroom when the verdict was read. They expressed relief, stating that justice may have been slow, but the jury got it right. This marked the beginning of their healing process and the start of a new chapter for them.
And what about the defense? How did they react?
Nick's friends, Emily and Andrew Erickson, were stunned. They had been convinced of his innocence and were surprised by the quick guilty verdict. They rushed to the courthouse only to realize their assumption was incorrect.
What happened at the sentencing hearing, Emily?
On April 13, 2023, Nick Firkus was back in court for his sentencing hearing and to hear victim impact statements. Heidi's brother, Peter Erickson, spoke about her and the difficulty in finding closure due to the lies they were told. Despite the verdict, Nick continued to maintain his innocence. He said, "I do maintain and will maintain to my dying breath my innocence of this crime. My body stands condemned to serve another man's sentence. But my soul remains free." Judge Leonardo Castro imposed the maximum sentence, life without the possibility of release.
Well, that's a tragic end. What remains unsolved in this case, Emily?
The mystery around the couple's financial problems still remains. Sergeant Nicole Sipes said they weren't able to definitively say what the money was spent on, which she admitted is a frustration as it would have helped complete the picture for some people. Following the revelation of Nick's conviction, his family, particularly his second wife Rachel, reflected on the loss and the impact it has had on their lives. Rachel often thinks about Heidi and likes to believe that she has a connection with her. She feels that, through her voice, she can give Heidi the voice she never had.
That's quite a sentiment, Emily. How did Heidi's family remember her?
Heidi's mother, Katina Sarrazin, remembers Heidi as a genuine, loving, and sincere young woman who wanted to live life to the fullest. She believes Heidi would not want people to become bitter or angry because of the tragedy she had to experience. Instead, she would want people to choose love, regardless of circumstances.
And what is the current status of Nick Firkus's case, Emily Norma?
Nick Firkus is currently appealing his conviction. It's yet to be seen what might come out of that appeal. As with many cases like this, the story is not quite done yet, with the potential for more twists and turns to come. Thank you so much for joining us at Hot Topic in Fresh News today. We've had an in-depth discussion about a gripping current event, and we appreciate you being part of it. Don't forget to subscribe, and make sure to activate those notifications so you don't miss any future episodes. Your support means everything to us. If you found our show interesting, share it with your friends, family, and social media circles. We value your thoughts, so please feel free to leave a comment.
And hey, remember, we're here every day, serving up the latest hot news topics, so don't be a stranger. There's always something exciting just around the corner.
We are so grateful for your support and can't wait to see you in the next episode.
Absolutely. And in the words of our favorite catchphrase, Smith, stay in the loop, keep your eyes on the news, our channel's content will amuse.